on the background. Okay, guys. Okay, guys, we are online. We are online, and well, we don't have viewers now. But viewers will be coming. So we have today absolutely non-SEO conversation, and it's not a it's not a battle. It's just friendly conversation. And the main idea is to show that we still can talk. Whatever election in what country, whatever results who was for makes a lot of difference probably, but we still can talk. Yeah. Okay. We have today. I do always. So yeah, you've been here before. You know that I do as Google told me to do. So from left to right on my screen. From left to right on my screen. Ammon Johns, and and Union Jack. We have David Amerland and no Jacob, whatever, no, okay. And we have Fabrizio Ballarini in a beautiful room. Yeah, I envy your room. Okay, guys, you know how we usually do. We usually have 5-7 minutes to bring audience to it, but today it's not a SEO subject, it's no presentation, nothing. We just can start to talk free format, and remember, no punches. Yeah, just make sure our screen stays safe. And okay, so I'll do a presentation. Okay, yeah, I don't think we didn't promote this event, so this event is just purely how is it? It just happened. Okay, so Ammon, from our point of view, he's British, living in the United Kingdom. David, well, you said you had dual nationality, but your Australian nationality have very little to do with it. So you British living in the United Kingdom, and we have Fabrizio Ballarini, who is Italian, obviously living in London, enjoying living in London, should I say? Okay, that my particular role is finished here because my opinion is irrelevant. I'm not British. I don't live in England. I don't live even in European Union. So well, it's all to you guys.
Okay, how do we start this?
I don't know how do we start. Okay, David, you want to say something?
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. I mean, that's obviously Brexit is something which, you know, the decision that Britain has taken to withdraw from the EU, which it has been involved with for over 43 years now, is quite momentous in terms of both the country itself and the international scene. And there are a lot of there's a lot of head scratching going on around it because, from a logical point of view, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Obviously, for a lot of people, it did. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made the decision they took, and that creates a communication gap in terms of understanding other people's motivation, other people's point of view, which immediately affects trust. And the moment trust is affected, then you begin to have a different kind of relationship building approach going on, which is what we're seeing at the moment in terms of how businesses are relating to the UK market, how they're making plans for the future. You know, these are reflected in terms of their ability to make predictions for where things are going.
Yeah, and trust is key in this whole debate, I think. We didn't really ask for this referendum in the first place. It's a very strange one, isn't it? It was made because David Cameron was in danger of losing some key politicians at a key point in the politics of the time, and decided that, yes, I will include to have a referendum as part of my campaign in order that my fellow ministers will stand by me. Not the voters, the fellow ministers. And
Yep.
to an extent, he made a deal with the devil, and essentially the devil came round to collect. And as usual, the politician who made the deal doesn't expect to pay for it. He expects all of us to pay for it.
You know, I forgot how much I love the way you frame things, because it's absolutely spot on. You know, it's brilliant, and that's so true. You know, and I think, Ammon, what you said beautifully reflects the greater reality. At the end of the day, whichever camp people voted in, they voted for the same thing. They want a country which works in an environment where they feel safe in, where they can actually lead their lives in. And I think it's what you said, whichever way it goes, and it's academic now, right? Whatever you voted for, it really doesn't matter. What matters is perhaps the communication between those who voted to stay and those who voted to leave, and also what happens next. And it's reflective of perhaps the greater scene globally, that the people whom we trust to lead us do a very poor job of it, and they continue to do a very poor job of it. And at some point, we have to change the system. And how we do that, right now, nobody has the faintest idea.
Yes. And more than anything else, this is a debate about change. And the only difference between the two sides is whether we believe we're better off changing from within the EU or from without the EU. And that's it. That's the only difference I've been able to find in any of the people I've spoken with face to face. We all believe that a change is needed. None of us are 100% happy with the EU. Nobody. We all admit there are flaws. We mostly think that, on the whole, what it does is good enough that it overrides those flaws. The only difference seems to be that some of us don't believe those flaws can be fixed from within. And that may not be because it's impossible, but because it's psychologically impossible. It's very difficult. We've all been in relationships, and sometimes it's very difficult to change a relationship from inside that relationship, because by being in that relationship, you're already taking a stance from which you may not be able to argue the case you need to. Sometimes we all need to get out of that relationship, take stock, reaffirm who we are, get to grips with ourselves again outside of that influence, and then whether we go back into the same relationship or seek a new relationship, at least we've reinterpreted where we are and what we want from a relationship. And for me, that was certainly one part of my decision to vote for leave. I think the UK needs a little bit of time on its own to know who it is. I think the people of the UK need a little bit of time to decide what the UK is before it worries about who the UK is in partnership with and what terms it wants for that partnership.
Yeah. And like from my side, I'm the guy who didn't vote, and and I'm the guy who will eventually, but most likely not be affected by things. So I've been living in London since 2013, so it's been a while, and that's where I started to work. So from very early days, I had quite a lot of trust in this country, and that's why I eventually moved here from Italy. And at the same time, I think that the same type of conversation is going on all over Europe, since the UK did it, and probably was going on in other countries before as well. It's to change things is quite difficult, and you have to take a step into one direction or another, and no one eventually did it up to now. But I guess that's something that is not completely new. I guess other things that similar discussion are going on in Italy. So I don't feel this is so different from my side. Living here, probably I'm feeling things in a different way, but at the same time I understand why people see it in one way or another.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult sometimes for any country, but certainly within the UK, to know how we're seen abroad. We have a perception, and we have what our media tells us everyone says about us, but it's very difficult to really know. And obviously this is something that all marketers are aware of, because we're always having to assess our client's brand or our own brands, and that too is very difficult. Yes, you go out, you listen on social media, but you're only getting snapshots, and you're only getting the people who bothered to say something. that doesn't necessarily give you the silent majority, so to speak. And I think we certainly saw that with the polls. The polls all said one thing was going to happen. No, not by a huge majority, but it was very clear. Oh, the young are definitely going to carry this, and it's definitely going to be a Remain. Was what we were all reading the day before the results came in, and then the results were completely different.
Uh,
Go on, David.
yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure I entirely agree with what you said. I mean, you're absolutely right on the political side, and politics is always very messy because it reflects the wills of the people. And if you take that into a marketing position, it's like you're asking people who are not your customers to make a judgment on your brand. And that's where the uncertainty comes in, and anything is to play. But in terms of a brand, and a country has to be a brand in many ways, it is always easy, relatively easy to gauge its importance by the number of people it affects. Best brand in the world, doing the best product possible, if only 5 people know about it, well, it's ineffective and irrelevant. And if you have a brand which actually is loved by many people and it influences the perception of the market, it becomes a market leader, which means that others trying to emulate what it does, then that makes it influential. And Britain has always been in that situation. It has always been the country that has been part of the cool kids club within inverted commas. And, it was, we say that one of the arguments is that, Europe was imposing, or the EU was imposing many things upon it, but Britain led the EU in more open-minded situations. It managed to always have preferential treatment within it because of its position and perceived power. And it always was special within Europe, within the EU. And the withdrawing from there not only has diminished the power that Britain has, but arguably it has diminished the ability of the EU to be as effective because it lacks one more very knowing and knowledgeable point of view. It's like the 4 of us forming a club, and then you suddenly withdraw. We say, oh well, Ammon, always disagreed. We don't care. But actually, you bring in so much experience and knowledge to the table that for a club of 4, let's say, for you to take off, immediately becomes devalued in terms of its perspective, and it's no different to what's happened here. A lot of the feelings which are riding high on this is because of that emotional aspect. People believed in Britain as an ideal, and the fact that you can't actually rely on it anymore, or the fact that you see it being diminished, produces an emotional response that then doesn't always get analyzed and quantified, which is why we get all these knee-jerk reactions across social media, and people, begin to become very emotional and very aggressive. And there's no need for that, but there is something happening which is affecting a lot of people. I think on a greater perspective, when we say something like this has happened, I was talking about it to Anton earlier, there's no single factor that actually contributes to it. There's a lot of moving parts that have contributed to a very complex picture. The fact that we don't understand it is the clearest signal, perhaps, that we are in a world which is really new. We have no rule book anymore. Whether we're looking at a period or an era of fact-free politics, quote unquote, or people who suddenly are making emotional judgments when they should be using the myriad of tools at their fingertips to actually make more quantitative, logical, fact-based decisions, and they're not. Whether it's any of those things or all those things together, the issue is that there's a complexity now which we can't run from and which we have to address before we take any step forward. Whether it's Britain doing it alone, or the EU doing without Britain, or the whole world fragmenting, or the whole world coming together, the challenge is the same. How do we get to understand what's happening? How do we form relationships with people whom are different from us in many different ways? Their accent, their ethnicity, their belief system, their religion, whatever. How do we learn to work together in a mutually respectful or respectful environment? And I think that challenge has always been there, but in the 21st century has become very real. And we have, at this stage, fallen very short of providing real answers to it.
Yeah. And the internet's magnified that because we're more likely to come into a much broader range of people, of backgrounds. With the real world, we met people through interests or through work. We already had something we were connected very closely to them by. And if we met them through work, we probably lived in the same area. We probably had similar-ish backgrounds. So there were a lot of things that tied these things together. And as soon as we go virtual, I can meet people who are influenced by things I have never experienced at all, never mind been heavily influenced by. And this is certainly dealing with empathy when we don't have so much of the shared background is certainly going to be a major factor of global politics and global socio-economics for a long, long time to come.
But I guess that's also where the disconnect comes from, because doing social listening and analyzing what happened online is very different from talking to actual people, and then that's where you figure out, like, after it happened, that people opinion was different. That's where you like what the media and like online people push is what appears to be, what is trendy and what people think. But then from there to move to like speaking to someone who's actual as a real person, and since all this political debate, they pretty much fought, like the fight is online for most of the cases. Then these politicians, most of the time, I think they're a bit disconnected from what people really want, because like the internet isn't always the representation of what people think. What I do online is completely different from eventually who I am
Well, it can be. I mean, it just depends how in touch they are with who they are. But what is interesting, again, is that Ammon brought up the word empathy. As it happens, I've done a lot of research on that very recently because of this book, which I'm finishing. And empathy is a real mind changer. And whether you're in the world of business or whether you're in the military or whether you're in any kind of real sport, whether it's a high level competition, empathy is a requirement because it allows you to break down barriers and open up your mindset. And you need that in order to increase the information flow which you have, which affects your decision making. And that's the same thing in sports within a very narrow context, or in a battlefield where you have opposing armies, or in business where you have business leaders making decisions, or as it turns out now, in a more global stage. And empathy is really hard to achieve because it requires real engagement. You can't fake it. You can't say, oh yeah, I understand you. If you don't really understand somebody, you need more than just the words. And I think one of the things is becoming evident, and Fabrizio, what you said now about the disconnect between the identities online and offline and how we behave is very much part of that problem. In order for us to fully actualize ourselves, to fully project who we are, it takes tremendous amount of effort. You need to look inwards, you need to think, who am I, who I want to be, what are my real values. And also then you have to go into quite some length of trouble to maintain that in terms of the relationships you form online. So, I mean, to give an example here, right? I mean, I know Ammon professionally, and it would be very easy to say, oh, this is what he stands for, I just need some SEO advice from him. I discard all the rest. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of thinking to actually accept his other views and think about them, from me to him, and obviously, from him to everybody else. So in order for anybody to engage in that effort when they don't have to, there has to be a real willingness to actually understand what they get out of it and what they are required to put back into that. And I think, I'm not going to use the word maturity here, but I'm going to use the word perhaps self-comprehension. If you don't know where you stand, it becomes a lot harder for you to actually do that because it is costly. It costs you in terms of energy and time and effort, and it makes it really hard for you to want to do it if you don't understand the context through which everything happens. So your point is very valid in that disconnect. We're not, the digital world is very new still. We are still growing into it. There are huge pockets of our society. There are huge pockets of our society which we still haven't connected with, and they haven't used the digital medium in a sort of full sense of the word. And all these things which we see right now, it's almost like Pandora's box, right? We opened up Pandora's box, all the ills are out, and we haven't yet quite seen hope, which is at the bottom. So I think it's part of the transformative or transitive period we're in, and we're experiencing it. Excuse me.
It's been a fascinating journey, and for me, the entire campaign, the referendum, every part of it was a journey. It was a journey to re-examine what I thought about lots of different things. It was a journey to discover the things I didn't know, and it was a journey to discover what mattered to me and why it mattered to me. And I think it's also proved to be a journey beyond that, and to look at different things. Take some of the dichotomies of politics itself. Okay. You have a government. The job of a government is to represent the whole country, right? Well, is it? Is it okay for it to just represent the people who elected it? Because after all, it was those views they elected.
Yes.
Now, actually, either answer is correct, but it needs to be consistent. You need to either, once elected, try and do your best for the whole country, or you need to be consistent in following the views that got you elected. Either one's fine. But I think once you start trying to chop and change between them, it gets to be inconsistent and will create tensions. You may lose some of the people that had voted for you if you start to try and broaden the base. You have to take the responsibility seriously, but you also need to be consistent to what got you elected. Be the promises you made. And we're certainly all aware of promises made in this campaign, which I've categorised all along as the dirtiest campaign I've ever seen in British politics. The levels of misinformation, the levels of manipulation are ridiculous. And it's not one side, it's both sides. There was a very early thing when we first had the two sides. They were called Stay and Go. And it quickly became Remain. Did you notice when that happened? Remain is straight out of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Most of the words are in some ways hypnotic. They have a certain effect. They work on a psychological level. And one side becomes Remain, which actually backfired in a way. Because, as I said, one of the key things that almost everybody across the board, all sides of the spectrum, wanted was change. We all believed there are things wrong and they need to change, and Remain is it's a position of no change. It's a position of no room for manoeuvre. It's a steadfastness. Even if we're wrong, we will remain. And I think it actually backfired. But yeah, overall, it was an incredibly difficult campaign. Everyone I know had to work so hard to find any facts on this. Neither side gave us much useful information. The government sent out that lovely brochure that it decided all the taxpayers should pay for early on. And there was nothing in it except doubt. Oh, this will probably happen, and this might happen, and oh, we're terribly scared that that could happen. But nothing about, here's the chances. Here's the chances of that. And actually, whether or not this happens will depend largely on whether you believe it will happen or not.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly the thing with the share prices. You know, we say we're going to leave, and immediately share prices fall. Why is this? Has Britain suddenly given away a huge portion of Britain? You know, it's got smaller. No. Have the people decided to work less? You know, our GDP is obviously going down. We can't work as hard. No. This is about people's faith. It's about people's belief in what's going to happen. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you put out a positive message, it's glass half empty, glass half full.
No, yeah, I was going to say, not entirely true. I'll tell you why. I mean, and you know, I mean, if we're talking about politics and countries, it becomes a little bit harder. But if we talk about business, it doesn't. And essentially, you know, I totally get what you said about the vagueness of the Remain campaign. But also, let's understand that they had absolutely nothing to guide them in terms of something like this happening. So everything they had was, I guess.
Apart from all of the statistics, all of the civil service, all of the intelligence services, apart
I
from
know,
that,
I
they
know.
had nothing.
No. When I say, I mean, all those things which you just mentioned, just opinions based on facts and analysis. That's all it is, right? And you can either choose to accept it or choose not to. And let's not forget, the guy who's trying to lead the country now is the same guy who said, well, we have had enough of experts telling us what to do. I mean, ridiculousness times two. But you made a very important point. You mentioned the fact that facts didn't play a huge part in this, and I think they still don't. And I think that's part of the problem. And the thing that, when you say everybody wants to change, yes, they do. We still want change. It's the same thing across the globe. But it's there's the question of how do you achieve change, and that's to be decided. And has the country changed itself internally? No, it hasn't. You're absolutely correct. Being British is, being part of the country, still do the same things you do. You wake up, you go to work, you give it 110%. What has changed is that brand quality, and that has always an effect. It's like working for a company. If your shares tank and you go and you lose 50% of your share value, you still go to work, you still produce the same products, you still do the same service to the same level, but the perception to your customers of who you are and what you do may have been tarnished, and that gets a ball rolling that long term can have a huge impact. It may not, it's a gamble as always, but potentially can, and that's the huge problem. And I think making a decision the way it was made on emotional issues,
and
from my perspective, and I'm usually very analytical, that's the big mistake. But I'm a minority here. I understand people vote emotionally. Understand, and I've said before, what has happened is what should have happened. If we go to this stage, there's so many moving parts that there's no single thing we can single out and say, if that hadn't happened, it would have been okay. No, it's not. I think there's a deeper problem, there's a deeper divide, there's a deeper reality of how we connect with who we are and what we do that needs to be addressed. And if
I'm
it isn't,
going to challenge one part there, that it was
yeah,
made
sure,
on
sure.
emotive and emotional issues.
Yeah.
Actually, what I saw was that the majority obviously voted to exit, and the majority of people who voted to exit said that one thing was their prime thing: sovereignty of British law.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Oh, yeah.
is not an emotional issue. That
No.
was one of the very few facts on either side of the campaign. My partner works in the courts in Brighton. There is not one single week in which at work in the courts it is not an issue that the European Courts of Justice can overrule British decisions made in British courts about British crimes on British soil.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how rarely they do it, the very fact that they can is slightly intolerable. And I don't mean the Human Rights Court. Human rights we're not so worried about. But there's also the court whose only job is to make sure that there's this nice homogenous zone. That, if something's illegal in these two countries, that they both have similar penalties. And do you know why that exists? Because it really suits business when no country can tax them or fine them much more than any other. That's where that law actually comes from.
Okay.
And that's an issue.
Yeah, I thought, okay, here's the thing, okay, and let me preface this because I totally agree with you, okay, I don't disagree at all. I think what you just said is beautifully framed and very, very direct. And you said, how rarely the EU actually does that. And here are two issues on this. Just because you can do something, doing it is not the same thing as actually being able to do it. So, for instance, for the EU to constantly exercise its veto power, for instance, and block UK law would become such an issue that the potential of that in itself would be a problem. It's the same thing as the managing director of a business. He has the power to say, hey, you guys all need to work 10 extra hours a week or you'll get fired. He could potentially say that. If he says that, and he doesn't, he loses so much goodwill that it makes him an ineffective leader, and that's it. His job will go. So having power is not the same as having unlimited power. So I think that was one thing. And the second thing is that you said that essentially the communication of all that in terms of change and why laws are applied which is a real problem, and I totally agree with you again. I think big business and big interests have gotten into bed with politics for a very long time, and they are adversely affecting our world. In both positions, which I agree with you on, I think it is always better to work from the inside than to work from the outside. Because from the outside, it makes you a supplicant, and from the inside, it makes you somebody who actually can work to create alliances and nudge things to the right direction. And that is my main, perhaps, objection to how it was handled. I think there are real grievances, real issues. Britain has missed. Britain has always been a leader. We've always taken the EU in the direction which we thought we would, because as a former empire, as a country that has always been very, facing a 360-degree kind of direction, we've been able to see a bigger picture than perhaps Europe. And that's why I think it's a loss for Europe and a loss for Britain. I think, this kind of division has weakened both, and it has, it's been a setback for a world that needs both sort of sets to work together. And, that's the real sadness. And when we come to this decision here, I said it's emotional, and I know a lot of people use sovereignty as a cause. I would perhaps challenge Ammon, most people's view being as granular as yours. I think for them it's more an idea rather than a fact, which is why if you don't have the facts as well as you do, then perhaps you can make a decision and say, hey, leaving is the best thing, as opposed to staying and working and changing this. So, but all of this is academic. I think, the problems which you highlighted are problems which haven't gone away. And they highlight the fact that the world we're in right now is really complex. If we don't tackle that complexity, if we don't manage to somehow raise the surplus, the collective IQ, we are going to face so many problems that this is just the beginning. And I think raising the collective IQ is what we should be working on. That connection I have with you, the connection you have with other people, it makes me smarter. I tap into your brain. I think, whoa, I just found out something new. That makes me better because I was able to get it from you. And you're the same, and we all work in that way. That's why we value the connectivity. If we don't manage to somehow translate this into real value in the real world, then it's going to become a two-speed world, which will keep on fighting with itself. We'll keep on being progressive and open online, and stepping back into the Middle Ages offline. So it's a recipe for disaster.
Like on my side, I think that, for example, I very much agree that without taking any, I'm not telling that UK would be better in or out, which option is the best one to succeed, but more looking at the kind of impact of it on trust and brand. At the end of the day, for me, that I've been here for a while, and I came here and trust this country, and I still do it to a degree, despite not having any kind of political and high emotional, I'm not highly emotional attached to it, but I still love living in this country. Yet if you consider this, the country as a company and someone that needs to buy shares of this company tomorrow, the way, not because of the choice, but because of the way things have played, created that uncertainty that impacted on the brand. And then people that would have had to do move here as I did, now, probably they would be way more doubtful in terms of shall I invest in this company, or is it something that, and that's the only scary bit eventually, is not because it could be the case that without Europe Britain will do well, and coming here would be, yes, a good choice for anyone anyway, but then what in the past when I did that choice, I had no trust issue. I was pretty much confident that that was going to be okay. Right now, for me, I'm still confident. For someone new, I have friends that are in the position of deciding that, just because they're younger, and for now, them trust is an issue. Or it's not trust, but is the confusion of what could happen, which then lower their kind of expectation and trust in moving here and investing time and their career and everything.
There's a couple of things there. First is this thing of the brand. It really does worry me that Britain's openness, its willingness to trade, its human rights seem to have become linked somehow in some people's minds with Europe. Oh, they're going to be less welcoming of foreigners, it's going to be less open, this is nationalism. Look, Britain only joined the EU in the 70s. We've got thousands of years, literally, of people from all over the world, often coming over to invade us, but we've got hundreds of years of refugees from all over the world coming here. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, refugees came here, rebuilt a life. England accepted, adopted, took on, look at it. England is famous all over the world as a nation of tea drinkers. Tea isn't an English product. It's not a British product. It's an import, and yet somehow we took it, we adopted it, we made it an icon. Chop suey. Anyone eaten chop suey? It's a British invention. It was invented in a Chinese takeaway. It means mix-up, and it was at the end of the day they'd run out of food. And somebody said, well, isn't there anything you can offer me? And they said, yeah, chop suey, which was a mix-up of the leftovers of all the different things. And it was so good the person asked for it next time and thought it was the name of a dish. What's the #1 British takeaway? Curry. And it doesn't matter whether it's Indian curry or Thai curry. We have this thing of being very open to world influence. Everything in this country is borrowed from various places or homegrown, influenced by things that were borrowed from various places. And I think that is a part of the British culture. And I think it's terrifying that somehow in people's minds that's become linked to the EU, and that the EU has subsumed the British openness as a foreign thing. And it's not. It's not at all. England has been a place people have wanted to go, to open up businesses, to visit. Oxford University has been a bastion the world over for hundreds of years. It's been a birthplace of science long before there was an EU, and I think it's terrifying the attitude some people have about what leaving the EU, which is a trade arrangement, means to politics and social things in this country that really shouldn't be linked that clearly in people's minds.
We diverge a little bit here. And I usually agree with you, but on this one, and I know it's a very patriotic, deeply patriotic point of view, and I totally respect it. But it comes down to a couple of things, and I think now you brought up tolerance and racism. I'm not saying in the least that the Brexit vote was in any way driven by racism, but the tone of the argument of the Leave campaign allowed the tiny minority of people. Even allowed a tiny
When you
minority.
say the Leave campaign, you are leaving out Farage from that, who was not a leader of the Leave campaign.
Well, I'm actually including him inevitably.
Right, exactly. Now, he wasn't part of the Leave campaign.
He
was somebody the media chose to put in.
I totally get that, and I totally also respect the fact that he wasn't an official part of the Leave campaign. But for better or for worse, he became the public face of many of the Leave campaign's arguments, unfortunately. And here's what's happened. And there's always been a tiny minority of racism within our country, led by ignorance, led by, whatever the reasons, it's always been there, and it's part of any country. And unfortunately, that tiny minority has been given permission to speak up, and the increased perception of racist attitudes is not an increased incidence of racism per se, but it is, they feel suddenly, we have the we're winning, and this is how we should behave, which is, I think, is deplorable. So we allow this to happen. And as you say, this is not the Britain we believe in the least. This should never have happened. He should never have been at the front of any arguments about whether we stay or leave, because to me he's just an ineffectual, divisive, polarizing figure. And yes, he should be there because we need him to be out in the public so we can see what he's doing, but he shouldn't be leading anything. And he did, unfortunately. And you also mentioned, and here's where I diverge a little bit. I love Britain as deeply as you do, and I know you were born there and I wasn't. but for me, it's the one country in the world, and I've lived in many countries where I totally feel at home. I feel a real connection with it, and what's happened is not reflective of the values which I sort of associate with it. And this is the big thing, okay, which I don't love it any less, but it does impact on the perception that others have of us, unfortunately. And you said, can we go it alone? You know the answer to that one. We can. I mean, bloody hell. Battle of Britain is one case in history where we went completely alone against the grain and proved that we can do it. We can do that again.
The Polish pilots.
Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, the thing is, the world has changed, and we both believe that an idea knows no borders. You believe it, and I believe it. Anybody who half a mind who works online knows this for a fact. And
I used to believe it more until America started buying up all our brains and putting them behind their borders and profiting very nicely from it. The infamous brain drain of the 60s proved that wasn't quite as true as we'd always thought.
I know, but the digital world has made the world, much richer from a cognitive point of view, because we're actually
breaking America.
Yeah. Well, we can change that, right? I mean, the whole thing, you can't change it by pulling out and building walls or going behind boxes. And I know, again, I mean, you said very pointedly, right?
Are we? Well,
from my perspective, we are.
I think we're just repositioning. This isn't a withdrawal. And
I know, you said that, but here's the thing, right?
Well, unless you can present some evidence, can we change that terminology? Because
yeah, I know. And we'll see from an evidence-based point of view in a few months from now, in a year from now, we'll actually be able to ascertain this. So right now, it's your perception against mine, and I think they're both valid, right? I mean, it would be presumptuous for me to say, "Hey, you're wrong," or vice versa. Okay?
Exactly. So, shall we go back to the standard, which is the way innocent till presumed innocent until proven guilty?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not saying. I mean, this is not a discussion of whether Brexit is right or wrong. It's happened, and this is what it is, right? It's more like an analysis of the things which have built up to it on a sort of more universal basis, right? Not one camp against another, but on both camps. This is a perception, and this is also the impact it has in the world and the challenges it actually surfaces as we move forward. And I think, all of these, from where I stand, any kind of perceived isolation, any kind of withdrawal is potentially harmful to both parties. And it's like, the example I gave you earlier. If there's 4 of us and we form a group and you suddenly withdraw for whatever reason, first of all, if you withdrew, we're all to blame, right? Because we made you feel unwelcome. Secondly, if you withdraw, we all get impoverished, right? Because you don't have access to perhaps the collective action we could have as 4 people. We don't have access to your ideas. Suddenly, there's 3 of us instead of 4. So it's a step back. It doesn't mean that you're not going to thrive on your own.
It would have been nice if Europe had been thinking of that when the Prime Minister went and asked for, look, give me anything to prevent this happening. Anything. Just give me any concession. And pretty much got nothing. And during the debate, we got threats. We got told, if you leave, we're going to punish you. You know what happens when you say stuff like that to a British person.
I do.
You make sure they are going to go, right.
I'm not defending any...
it's very difficult
any action here. You understand that, right? What I'm saying is
difficult to stay a part of a group that acts like they don't want you or need you. And to be honest, from the English perspective, that's how Europe feels.
Yes.
Right up until after we'd left, when they said, "Oh, well, we really respected you," we didn't feel that at the time.
I'm not 100% sure on that one, because that's a public thing that they put out, right? But essentially, if you have one country which punches way above its weight against anybody else, and Britain has always done that, seriously.
Switzerland.
When you can, well, Switzerland doesn't, because although it's part of the...
It's got everyone's money. Do anything we don't like, we'll burn it.
Yeah, that's true. and suddenly that country withdraws because of the situation it created at home. I think that is, it's a loss. It's a real loss. And, having this discussion here, obviously, we're just sort of highlighting and isolating problems. We're not, we're not sort of judging the rightness or not of the decisions that have been made.
The big issue is we have a system. we've got a system which has been refined over centuries, which says, look, when we've got a difficult decision to make, we announce a period in which we will discuss it and debate it, and everyone gets to put their thoughts forwards. And then on that set date, we stop talking about it and vote. Now, we did this.
Okay.
We had a referendum.
We
this
did.
is the process.
And,
in
okay.
that time, everyone was free to present evidence. And the persuasion of that evidence is then reflected in the vote. I didn't find one thing that persuaded me that I needed the EU.
Yeah, I totally accept that. I'm not, you know, like I said, I totally respect both your position and your willingness to do what you did. I don't judge that. And because for me to do that, for anyone to do that, it's hugely presumptuous, right? It's like, first of all, they debase your intelligence, and secondly, they bring into question your ability to be, you know, rational. And I don't think either of those things are under question. I think what is under examination from both our perspectives is how this is carried out, how all those things, all those little dots need to be linked up together to make a reasonable decision. And I think the way that this was carried out shows the disparity between two systems. You know, the system that was in effect up to the 20th century, where we were told what to do on the side of buses, and you think, oh, it's on the side of a bus, I must believe that. And I'm using this in a very broad way, right? And the ability to actually do due diligence and think for yourself and say, hey, is this right or is it wrong? And I think a lot of us in globally, not just in the UK, are not doing that. And I think that is a huge problem. And unless that is addressed somehow, and to that we all play a part. You can't say, oh, you know, okay, you voted leave, it's up to you, or you voted stay, it's up to you. It's not. At the end of the day, you know, you and I are both people, and we know each other. The last thing I would ever want, and you would ever want, is for either of us to suffer through any kind of decision. And it goes for anybody we know and people we don't know. This is where you feel a kind of empathy towards others. And I think
though, you know, either side can advertise on the side of a bus. I'm not sure that's been the big issue. I think the big issue is that we haven't adjusted the system to cope with mass media. Because when the democratic process was written down and built, we didn't have television. We certainly didn't have the internet. I don't think it adapted to television. I mean, it kind of adapted to just one or two channels, you know. Oh, the BBC will have a debate between both sides. Great. But what happens when you've then got talk shows on ITV and Channel 4, which aren't as controlled, you know, and should they be? Should it be a public debate where the public get to debate, or should it be a public debate where the politicians carefully debate and it's moderated? And we haven't adapted to this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the, you know, everything we said and everything Fabrizio said as well.
And I think that side is a bit like the way we, you know, when you were seeing that message on a bus, you were going back home and discussing it with people, doing some accurate research eventually. But now the way like media is presented to you, you are consuming that probably on Facebook or somewhere else where there's another guy pushing another bit of content after 5 seconds, hoping to capture your attention. And then like I guess the ability of like people then going back and reflect, taking a step back, and then the power of media, who has got more money to push into the game, who has got a better control of those channels, can play a role. And I guess I had few friends in US, and like they looked quite closely at this as kind of and it was something that you wouldn't expect from outside, you know. All over the world they looked at this event because again you always think, you know, when this will happen in your country, what media and people will play, what's the role of them playing. And going back to perception, you know, I was welcome on day one, I'm still welcome. I still think that people here, well, I live in London where like is probably slightly different from outside, but still I still have perception that even though when I go outside London, there's no any, you know, it's very little any kind of discrimination or like the integration between people compared to other country. And I come from Italy where like north and south you know, there's been a lot of political debate and all that kind of stuff. So my things haven't changed. I don't think that people are any different. It's just a perception that you might have after this choice that things are different, and the power of media, like internet, to influence that is quite a lot nowadays, and it's different from what it used to be, because like probably the social media, in the way the structure, in the way everyone is pushing out information, and there's no any conversation that follow up more than five replies, and like whether in the past you had people maybe debating for a full month on a single topic. Like there's one guy that is pushing you one news, and then you have a thumb up, thumb down, and then there's another guy who's pushing you another news, and then based on that you have to judge.
Yes.
Like eventually, like some people do. I'm not saying that everyone is stupid, you know, it's far from there, but like myself as well, you know, internet was the best way to keep up with things, and like social media is like, I was not proactively researching, I was just reading the news in the way they were pushed to me, and then based on that I was making a judgment. But
Okay.
Yeah. I think to an extent, one of the things that's different today from any previous generations is that it's actually easier to do our research. It's actually easier to fact check. To an extent, in the 50s, you believed what you were told unless a journalist did the fact checking for you. And perhaps, you know, one of the things David and I talked about on Twitter was that we both feel that journalistic integrity was poor. Journalistic responsibility seems to have gone downhill. It's much more important to sell papers. It's much more important to have somebody like Farage forward, because that will get people tweeting about it and make your program look more important, and it will get more ratings and it will sell more papers, than to worry about whether Farage actually has any position in the Leave campaign, which he didn't. Boris Johnson was the leader of the Leave campaign. He was. and
No, I agree. I totally agree. I'm on
yet
this line.
Farage got more time than he did. And why? Who elected that? Who decided? The media decided. Meanwhile, Martin Lewis of Money Saving Expert was trying to get airtime, and he wanted to do a balanced view to talk to people about what they should be doing in the run-up to Brexit. You know, what are the real financial facts here, which will actually affect your income the most? And they said, what side are you going to be on? And he said, well, I want to take a balanced look. Oh no, we can't have that, because we've got regulations that say if we've got people from this side, we've got to have people from that side. Death by KPI, which it created a ridiculous situation, and the media, the information we were presented, was therefore tainted, biased. But I believed that the British public are better than that. I know I was. I know I went and looked for actual facts. I knew I dismissed Farage. Everyone I've spoken to who also voted Leave said they voted that way in spite of who was representing the Leave campaign, not because the biggest influence on my vote was the Remain campaigners. They kept lying to me. They kept giving me non-information, and they couldn't seem to make one actual argument for staying in. Honestly, I didn't see one argument apart from money for staying in. And although, you know, I work in marketing and I'm helping companies make money, I do that for social reasons. I'm a socialist. I like businesses to be successful because they then employ people who can feed their families. I like businesses to be successful because they can pay taxes and improve the situation of the country they're in. I'm not so keen on tax evasion, which there's a lot of EU help towards. It's not something that the EU's done a huge amount to prevent. It certainly is that most of the EU has a financial it's a financial instrument. It's designed to make trade easier. It's designed to make the provision of goods and services easier. All these wonderful things about, you know, the free movement of people is linked to the fact that you need that to have the free movement of services. I can't have my service business be working across borders if I then have to apply for a visa and it takes 6 months before I can get into that country to provide that service?
Mm-hmm.
So
On that, 2 points. One, I agree that nowadays you have more tools to discover the information. At the same time, the way technology is evolving, if you think about Google as well, in the past doing a research was a pretty hard task eventually, and you were doing that thoroughly. Right now, everyone is going towards presenting that information to you with cutting slightly your job in making that call. Like when they give you instant answer, when they give you, well, that doesn't always happen in this kind of research, but like the way things are moving are probably to a stage where, like, if you want to get a quick answer to, or like if you want to find information without being as thorough, you can do it. And then behavior of people is changing slightly, because if in the past I was very skeptical about everything presented to me, right now if you serve me 3 times something that is relevant, the 4th time I won't be going back and like say, hey, let me go a little bit deeper. And then second is on services. That's why, like in my previous job working for an advertising agency, and like we were employing people, like we had international clients, and mainly when you work with Europe and then other countries, like the fact movement of people in services was quite important, because you have to work with that country, and you need to find resources that can then work with that country. And like that eventually is, again, is all speculation, but like if things change, things will slightly change. There's nothing that, and even though, like back in time, like we had the chance to, we were hiring, you are the best one obviously, but then if you have 2 candidates and one is ready available to you and the other one is more complicated to get, that's the nature of business. You will end up choosing the one that is available to you. In the same way, probably talents from like that need to apply for a visa, or like need to go through any kind of relocation, are more likely to not make it, if that is said. But then that's how the industry works as well. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I
the,
mean, you go.
the issue for me is one that you mentioned IQ earlier, and that I almost spluttered, because this isn't about IQ. The fact is that all humans are affected by psychology, and psychology gives us innate biases. We have these cognitive biases, and
Mm-hmm.
the intelligent are not immune to them.
Mm-hmm.
Your IQ doesn't protect you from them. If anything, you can be almost too stupid to have certain biases because you lack the perception that's needed for them. But no matter how brilliant you are, you will be affected by certain biases. One of the great ones is the belief that other people are more affected by mass media than we are ourselves. And where I see that is lots of people saying, oh, well, the media throughout this has promoted racism. It's, made racial attacks happen. But here's the thing. Here's the test for that. David, Fabrizio, do either of you feel more racist this week than you did 3 months ago? Has the media created any more racism in either of you personally, or are you doing this thing where you think everybody else has a different lower function of brain than yourselves and wasn't able to dismiss the same stuff you saw as easily as you did?
No, I think what you're saying is not as correct as what it should be, because
You do feel more racist?
no,
No. Okay.
I
So,
wouldn't. No,
do
no,
you
no.
see what
I
I'm
mean,
saying here? This
no, no.
is an
I mean,
actual cognitive
no,
effect.
it's not. It's not really that
It
simple,
is.
because
It's in the Wikipedia as well if you want to look it up. If you look up cognitive
yeah, no, no,
bias,
no.
you'll
It's not
find that
about
one.
cognitive. I understand that. No, no, I totally agree with you. First of all, cognitive bias is true, absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why we need so many different perspectives. Because if we get together, let's say me and Fabrizio get together, and we totally agree, we perhaps also suffer from the same cognitive biases, which becomes self-affirming, and suddenly we think, the world is pink today. But if we have somebody else in the group, and this is where the power of connectivity comes in, the other person's perspective and a willingness to actually consider that becomes a buffer towards that cognitive bias. And that's the real sort of test of intelligence. You become smarter not because you know more, but you actually are able to guard against your own blind spots. And the only way you can do it is not through yourself, but it's through the eyes of others. So having that kind of connectivity is a definite plus. The second thing is that, no, I mean, if you're not racist, the media is not going to do that. And this is not what I said. I said is that essentially the tone of the overall argument created an area of permission. This is framing, which allowed those who are racist, and they're always a minority, and I totally agree with you, and we know, we never actually condone it, but those bad apples now feel that, hey, we can step up and say what we say, and it's acceptable, whereas in the past they felt it was not as acceptable, and they sort of, self-edited their behavior, and now they don't. And this is a real problem. I mean, it's like, for instance, if you and I get into a bar, and we both know each other, right, and we have this really loud argument, suddenly the potential of having a violent incident by those around us, not me and you, goes up, because the tension between us, or the perceived tension, goes up. And it could be nothing to it, just you and I are used to arguing at that level, raised level of voice. But those around us don't know that. They think, it's a real argument about to break off, to brew up. So suddenly everybody's ready for fisticuffs, right? And we contributed to that. And it's that kind of thing. But it's a problem to be addressed. It's not,
I agree 100% with that, and you're absolutely right. It's the very fact you've created conflict that has raised that level of likeliness to further conflict. So everyone that's complaining about racism is actually contributing to the chances that there will be a racist outbreak, because they're creating that anti-empathy instead of that calming influence.
And I'm sorry, Fabrizio. I'm just very quickly. I was going to say I totally agree with Ammon pretty much in everything, right? On what he says. It's just neither of us wants to see that happening. It has happened, and this is just part of the issues we need to deal with. Moving forward, the information overflow and how we actually get to the facts when we're presented with a picture, the tone and how we set expectations and maintain a kind of society we can all feel functional within. These are the real issues moving into a 21st century environment.
And I guess that, yes, the media won't change you, but then you at the same time you have power to nudge people in and if you keep pushing, I'm not saying that everyone will fall into things, but then you still have power. You have the chance to talk to me 1 times more, 3 times more than the other guy has, and you have a little bit more chance to convince me than the other one has, or that's the only I guess difference. At the end will still be my call, and most likely you won't trick me, or if you want to, but
which
still
is part of why we get these pockets of votes. You very much got London voting to remain, as you'd expect, and Brighton too, because this is where the most international businesses are, where the most people from different cultures are, where the most institutions that will be affected directly by trade loss from the EU are, and those things therefore mean that that's going to present pockets there. Whereas further north, where there's a lot less of international trade, they don't have the stock exchanges there. There are far less businesses with people who depend on the EU specifically. We see less of that voting, and so we do know that grouping, that essence of who you talk to and coming up with collective views does happen. We can see that by the fact that the vote does have geographical borders to it.
Yeah, but that's not that's not an issue. I think what you said is 100% correct. I mean, but it's not an issue in itself. I think the real issues of this, on a global scale now, not just in Britain, are the facts that we are still very poor at getting to factual information, and we're still very poor at communicating across different groups so that each one learns to respect the viewpoint of the other and actually think about it. And I think that is a real loss, for society. And I'm talking globally now, okay? It's not just the UK, because it doesn't, it's not endemic just to us. But in a connected world, we still haven't learned how to communicate in a way that accepts somebody's point of view, and we actually think about it and we say, I think he's wrong and these are my reasons, or I think he's right and these are my reasons and perhaps I should reconsider. That is such a loss when we can't do that, that, you know, that's the real tragedy in this, really.
But that always has, and we're coming right back full circle to empathy here. So much of that is about assuming that other people made their decision in a different way to us. Now, we have different personalities, we have different orders, but I think the most important essence of democracy is that we automatically assume that everyone gives the same level of consideration to their vote as we did to ours, and we should assume that. And when we see people saying, oh, well, they didn't have all the facts I did, it says so, prove it.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't think about this as carefully as I did. They made a stupid decision. You know, that's when
no, it's not. I totally agree with you. You know, earlier this year, is it this year? Yeah, this year. I lose track of time here. My book came out on trust, and Ammon, you read it, and you know that we are willing to trust strangers, people we've never met before, whom logically we shouldn't trust, provided we respect them, provided we live in a framework where we actually respect the other person. And if we don't have that kind of respect, then we don't trust strangers because we don't trust them. We see them as a perceived threat. And how we actually create a larger society like that? Whew, I mean, that's a huge challenge, right? But my point is, we're all participants in that. It doesn't matter what point of view you have, or I have, or Fabrizio has. If we don't contribute equally to creating that kind of culture now, we should have absolutely zero expectation of anything positive happening as we move forward. We're only going to see more polarization, more little pockets of resistance, more meisms where, you know, we all get together and create a little fortress, and we're okay, Jack. Everybody else, you know, they can take the high road. And that, you know, see, it doesn't work in a world which is facing problems which are really huge and you can't solve on your own. It's, you know, it's never really going to go far.
Well, I think the biggest thing that we probably covered today is that, you know, there are valid arguments on all sides. There are things that we need to consider, and the whole point of democracy is supposedly that we get a time to consider it, we get a time to try and influence other people, and then we vote, and whichever way that vote goes, we accept it, get on with it, and use unity to move forwards. Even if it's the wrong direction, we go there together, we support each other, and it will work out.
Guys, we've been doing like 1 hour 10 minutes. I know Fabrizio has to go, and I know you both can talk for Olympics, and we will till next Tuesday easily. Well, my suggestion is, okay, I will stop right here, and basically we all have, well, you all mostly, but we from our side we have to see what's gonna happen, so we can come back to the same more or less same format in a couple of months. In a couple of months, something will happen. Surely.
Okay.
How does it sound?
It sounds good. I think that's excellent. Ammon, thank you very much for taking part. And I know you probably expect to be left on, and it's not the case, as you probably realize.
No, yeah. When I make a post, I put it, can we still talk? Well, meaning you basically, but well, myself as well. Yeah, and the idea is we can still talk. This is a major point.
Yes.
Because as soon as we all stop talking and start punching our screens, that's it. Finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally self-defeating.
We can disagree and still respect each other, and that's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not only that, but I think there's value in considering others' points of view. You know, total value, and it's not. There's no absolutes in this world. You know, there's no position that cannot benefit from extraneous knowledge. So I think this is brilliant.
Okay, so guys, we're going off air. Thank you very much for watching us.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
You